And I'm thrilled to introduce you to Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati, one of the preeminent spiritual teachers in India and in the world. And we're talking tonight about her book, Hollywood to the Himalayas, A Journey of Healing and Transformation.
So beautiful to be together. So beautiful to be together with you and at this beautiful time and with all of our community from across the country, across the world. It's beautiful.
And I am excited to tell people about the array of things that you do. The first time that I met Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati, she was juggling hundreds and hundreds of people with grace and welcoming and seva, because her spiritual path is one of service. Unlike some spiritual sannyas who want to withdraw from the world and bliss out with the divine, her bliss is serving others, serving women and children, serving the rivers. She's the Secretary General of the Global Interfaith Alliance. She's the president of the Divine Shakti Foundation, serving women and children. She's noted for her committee work with the United Nations and the World Bank, the Transformational Leadership Council. She's the author of 4 books, and I'm particularly excited to have you learn about her inspirational journey and the dedication that has brought her through childhood challenges and traumas to spiritual realization. But first of all, what's a nice Jewish girl from Stanford like you doing here in saffron robes?
So it's been really a journey of grace, and it's interesting. We speak Hollywood to the Himalayas, the title of the book, the arc of the journey of my life. And as I sit here with you this evening in Barbara's books, here in Chicago, we've gone Hollywood to the Himalayas, into Chicago, into Barbara's books. And that arc from the childhood, the life in which, as the book's title implies, was in Hollywood. I grew up in Los Angeles, quite literally in Hollywood, amidst that world of glamour, that world of opportunity, that world of privilege, that world in which we really had all of that, which most of us are told is what we need in order to be happy. A lot of money, a lot of opportunity, a great education, to, wear the right clothes and go to parties and know the right people and get the right titles and degrees. And I did that. I graduated from Stanford University. I was in the midst of getting my PhD in psychology. And yet, while on the outside, everything was perfect, on the inside, I was suffering. And I was suffering because, in my mind, it was because of that which had happened to me earlier in childhood, the struggles, the challenges, the pain, the trauma. And of course, the way that I, as so many of us do, had tried to alleviate that pain and suffering through reaching out to something outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
Drugs, alcohol, food, sex, shopping, gambling, whatever it may be, whatever our soft or hard addiction of choice might be, to alleviate that pain of that moment. And that's exactly what I did. The dilemma, of course, as anyone who's tried to make themselves feel better through drugs or alcohol or food or shopping or sex or gambling, is it doesn't work. It actually makes things worse. But I was 25 by that point, and I knew it wasn't working, but I didn't know what to do or where to go. It actually reached a point where I was successfully managing my pain, managing my difficulties, which really in this world is what so many of us are told is our highest and best option.
Yeah, you'd lived the American dream.
Exactly.
You'd gotten married, and your husband was on a spiritual quest to India, and you liked Indian food, so you decided, what the heck, I'm going to go with him to India. And it's so beautifully told here that you had discovered Parmarth Nikitan, and you had begun to taste the beauty of Mother Ganga. However, you and your husband were about to go up into the Himalayas, and as you were leaving Parmarth Nikitan.
So yes, it's a beautiful story that he's lovingly brought us into. I'll make that bridge for those listening who haven't read the book and who don't know the story. So at 25, in that state of managing the pain I was in, managing the suffering, not knowing that there even was a possibility of anything higher or better, real joy, peace, freedom, awakening, nothing. I agreed to go to India, as you said, because my husband was on a spiritual quest. He wanted to go. I was the strict vegetarian and agreed to go. And we get to India and open up a 500-page guidebook sitting in a coffee shop in Delhi. And the guidebook said Rishikesh. I mean, it said a lot of things, but the page I opened it to said Rishikesh. And this, of course, was 1996, so it was pre-Google time. And Rishikesh sounded beautiful. It was mountains, it was a river. I didn't know the mountains were holy. I didn't know the river was holy. But it sounded like a beautiful place. It was close to Delhi. It was easy to get to. And we arrived there. And I went down to the banks of the sacred Ganga, the Ganges, as we say in this country, not even knowing that the river was sacred, that the river was worshipped as the mother goddess. And standing there on the banks of the river where I had gone just to freshen up, I wanted to just put my feet in the river and cool down a bit. As I stood there, I had the most extraordinary experience of oneness and connection with all of creation, with the divine, with the creator, with the creation, with everyone and everything. And I experienced this perfection, an infinity, an expansion of myself. I, who had always thought there was something critically wrong with me, that I was just not good enough, that I just wasn't worthy enough. Suddenly, here I've had this experience, unasked for, unanticipated. I was not on a spiritual quest. I didn't even know it was something that was available and accessible to me, something I was worthy of. And I had this experience of absolute perfection of myself, my capital S self, and of the universe and of my place in the universe. And I burst into tears. And I knew that that was where I needed to be. that was where I needed to stay. And it was so amazing, Bob, because I had never had any experience like that in my life, any experience of an inner knowing like that. But there it was. And then I found Paramarth Nikathan, as you mentioned, the ashram that I now live in. I found it because originally it was just this beautiful, clean pathway from the hotel we were staying in down to the banks of the Ganga. So much nicer than the alleyway that, originally the hotel guy had sent me down. And this ashram, Paramarth Nikathan, was just so beautiful. So I started using it as just this pathway to go back and forth between the hotel and the sacred river. And I was walking through the ashram one day, and I heard a voice. And the voice said, "You must stay here." I was a scientist. I wasn't a mystic. I didn't hear voices, but there it was. And I was just about to ignore it. I ignored it already. And then I heard it again. And I was just about to ignore it the second time. And it was this very loud, very clear voice that said, "You must stay here." And I was just about to ignore it again when I remembered that on the airplane to India, I had taken this vow because my trip to India made no sense in my mind. Husband was on a spiritual quest. I wasn't. I got great vegetarian food on my corner. There was no need to travel across the world for vegetarian food or even vegetarian Indian food. There was a great Indian vegetarian restaurant right on our corner. And on the plane, I had said to myself, this makes no sense. Why am I going across the world to a place that I know nothing about, have no interest in being in, just because he wants to go and I can get vegetarian food? And so I had taken a vow on the plane that I would keep my heart open, that there must be a reason I was going that I wasn't aware of. So when I heard the voice for the second time, standing in Paramarth Nikathan, I remembered my vow. And I looked up and I see a sign that says office. And I went in and told them I wanted to stay. And that began my connection with the ashram. But I wasn't allowed to stay yet. I had to wait. Until the head of the ashram came back. It's a very, very revered, respected, traditional lineage within the Hindu tradition. In those days, 25 years ago, you couldn't just, as a single female, wander in off the road and say, I want to stay. Now you could, but 25 years ago, you couldn't. And so I needed the permission of the head, the president, to stay. What I didn't realize was that this president was this extraordinary enlightened master, this enlightened being. In my mind, I was waiting for a guy with a suit and tie and, a briefcase who was going to kind of review my file.
The president.
Exactly. And either stamp like, yes, give her a room, or no, send her on her way. And he didn't come. It turned out he was in America, actually, on an important project for the Encyclopedia of Hinduism. But I decided, okay, let's go to the mountains, as you said. And so we decided we were going to head to the mountains the next day. And then he came. And I met him. And it was the most extraordinarily beautiful, profound meeting I had ever had in my life, because I knew, I could feel that this being in whose presence I was so different from any being in whose presence I had ever been. And the vastness of the love and the truth was just boundless. And he said, welcome home. This is your home. You can stay anytime you want. He said, no problem. You can go to the mountains if you want, and come back whenever you want. No problem. I'll tell them to give you a room. And I thought, okay, we're going to go to the mountains and let's see what happens when we come back. And I'm walking. This is now that moment that you just asked about. I'm walking to leave the ashram. And my feet literally get glued to the ground of the ashram. I cannot walk out of the ashram. And actually, you know what? Give me the book. I'll take a moment and read for people, because I know we're supposed to be doing a reading as well. So in addition to a telling, we're supposed to be doing a reading. So I turned and walked toward the iron water pump in the center of the ashram complex, midpoint between the small road in front alongside the Ganga River and the small road in back that connects the back gates of the ashrams lining this stretch of Swarg Ashram village. I turned right at the water pump to head back to our hotel, where I would tell Jim the great news of what had happened. We could stay here after our trip to the mountains. He was looking for a guru, and fortuitously, I had found one for both of us. But the moment my body turned right, I couldn't take another step. My feet were stuck to the ground. I looked down. Had I stepped in something? Indian chewing gum that welded my bare feet to the concrete pathway? There didn't appear to be anything on the ground. Invisible crazy glue then? What was it? Something was holding my feet to the ground. They wouldn't come up no matter how hard I contracted my leg muscles to raise them. I scrunched my toes to see if I could feel something on the ground, but it felt just the way the concrete always feels, warm and smooth. Certainly not like chewing gum or crazy glue. Oh my God, I realized I've contracted some horrible disease. One of my vaccinations didn't work, and I've lost the use of my legs. I must have polio or tetanus or Ebola or some other disorder that is slowly eating away my muscles and my nerves. Oh God, please help me. As I flailed my arms, trying unsuccessfully to extricate my feet from the ground, a wave of calmness suddenly washed over me. And as the wave descended, it drew the energy from my eyes, which had widened in fear, and down into my abdomen. After a few breaths, I calmly realized that fatal illnesses probably don't come on like this. Suddenly, with no pain, no other symptoms, no warning, no infection or fever. Still not convinced, but calmer, I tried to think of other explanations. Maybe my legs had gone to sleep. We'd sat on the floor in Pujya Swamiji's room. Pujya Swamiji is the name of my guru, of the president.
His Holiness.
Yes, exactly. For a while, and I wasn't used to sitting on the ground. Maybe it was a delayed reaction, and my legs had fallen asleep. I put a hand on each calf, but they weren't numb or tingling. No pins and needles. They were not asleep. A small crowd was gathering around me. Being white was unusual, and I had found myself being stared at frequently during our days in Delhi. Now, however, I was not only white, but I was also flailing my arms in the middle of the courtyard like an airplane trying to take off. At that moment, a group of children came racing the ashram pathway. Many of the ashram workers live in rooms around a courtyard in the gardens, and most have children who, of course, run and play. They were playing an Indian version of tag and raced each other at high speed. Instinctively, I stepped backward to prevent being knocked over. The children passed, and I realized I'm free. I just moved backward. My feet aren't glued to the ground anymore. I turned again toward the back gate to make my way out of the ashram. And again, My feet were stuck. I could not contract a single muscle. I just moved backward, I thought. I definitely did. For some inexplicable reason, I could walk backwards only. If someone had told me that I would contract an illness whereby I was restricted to backward motion, I would have laughed at the sheer idiocy of it. Your brain works or it doesn't. Your muscles work or they don't. But with my feet still seemingly glued to the floor, as I had no other option, I swung around and shifted my weight so that I now faced Puja Swamiji's area with my back to the ashram's back gate and the hotel just past it. I'll just walk out of this ashram backwards, I thought. Not at all distressed at the idea and actually feeling proud at having successfully diagnosed my weird Indian ailment. But no, as I leaned back and tried to pick up my feet to follow the rest of my body, they wouldn't come. The crowd around me was growing, and I tried to ignore them. I had to figure this out. I had tried, feet first facing forward and then facing backward, to walk out the ashram gates, and my legs wouldn't move. I could not walk out of the ashram. However, I'd been able to walk backward when the children raced by. There was only one possible explanation. It was not the direction of my body that mattered. It was the direction I tried to move. I could move toward Swamiji's room, but I couldn't walk out of the ashram. As my eyes filled with tears, I tested my new hypothesis. I was already facing his room. Could I walk forward then? I lifted my right leg easily, and the left just as easily. As though walking on the beach in footsteps already imprinted in the sand, I walked back toward his meeting room. I entered the room and realized that only a few minutes, perhaps 5 or 7, had passed since I left it for the first time. Suddenly, gently, he lifted his gaze from the family he was sitting with to me standing by the door. I think, I began slowly, I think I am supposed to stay now, I told him.
How sweet. And this is the beginning.
That was the beginning. That was 25 years ago in September.
And so many beautiful experiences since. However, there were other vows you made.
Yes.
Such as you were never going to edit or even read the Encyclopedia of Hinduism.
Yes. I didn't vow that I wouldn't read it or edit it. What I had vowed was, it was this enormous project. My guru is someone who, his mantra is yes. And he takes whatever the universe sends him as sent by God.
Uh-huh.
So a tsunami hit South India. Yeah, we're going to be there. We've never worked in the southern coast of India before. No problem. We're going to go and we're going to rebuild villages and set up kitchens and do massive, massive disaster relief work. Of course. There's no ashrams or rest houses or medical clinics on the path to the sacred mountain of Mount Kailash, the lake of Lake Mansarovar in Tibet, a very, very sacred pilgrimage area that people go to at high altitude, owned in China now. No problem, he says. We're going to build something. And we did, 3 of them, in fact. So he is someone who, whatever lands in his lap, he takes it as the divine has sent it. So with regard to the encyclopedia, he had taken...
Well, hang on just a second. 3 of the highest blank in the world.
3 of the highest ashrams.
Ashrams with the highest toilets
Yes.
in the world,
Yes.
because hygiene is very important to him.
So, yes, a separate point, but very, very important. The water, sanitation, and hygiene, when you were introducing me and you mentioned that I'm Secretary General of the Global Interfaith WASH Alliance. Well, WASH stands for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene. And he has been deeply, deeply committed to protection and preservation of the sacred rivers of India since even before I knew him, I mean, from his childhood. And then slowly, the emphasis on sanitation and hygiene became something that became a very great passion, because we learned how many people suffer and die every year due to lack of sanitation, lack of hygiene. Do you know that more people suffer and die every year due to lack of clean water, which in many cases is due to open defecation, lack of sanitation, lack of hygiene, and what's happening in our water? More people die of that than all forms of violence combined. And that's really the core of a lot of the work that we're doing with the United Nations, with so many other major organizations. So in any case, yes, we built not just 3 of the highest ashrams, but actually the highest permanent structure in the world. The ashram at Dirapuk, which is on the mountain of Mount Kailash at 17,000 feet, is the highest permanent structure, or at least it was when we built it 15 years ago, 15 years ago, in the world. The Mount Everest base camp is only a seasonal structure, but this ashram is there 12 months a year. So, circling back to the encyclopedia, which you mentioned, he, a renunciant, a monk, recognized the need for an encyclopedia of Hinduism for the Indians who were living abroad. There's such a huge diaspora all over the world. And the lack of an authentic, remember, there was no Google, there was no Wikipedia at that time, or Hindupedia at that time, or Yogapedia at that time. And the amount of misinformation about the Hindu tradition was something that was causing great distress for so many of the children of those who had come in from India. So let's say that you studied in India, you grew up in India, you moved to America. Your children then are growing up in America, studying in America, and the lack of information about the tradition was so much that he felt like we really need an encyclopedia. So he said, we will do it. And it became this mammoth project, which by God's grace, we finally finished in 2012. And it was finally 11 volumes of about 600 pages each. The very first encyclopedia of Hinduism in the world, which was launched by of India in a huge event, then the Vice President of India in another huge event, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain in London in another huge event. But the reason that I had said in the beginning, I don't want to touch this, was it was huge. 10,000 entries, more than 1,000 scholars, at a time when people were functioning with fax machines and carbon paper. People weren't on the internet. And it was so overwhelming. And so in the beginning, they had said, oh, this is great. She's here. She can edit. She can work. And I looked at the scope of this project and said, I can't do this. There is no way. And yet the law of karma is such that fast forward 10 years later, I ended up actually having the great blessing of serving as the managing editor of it It, of course, was much, much closer to being finished by the time it got in my hands than it had been 10 years earlier, with so many scholars working all over the world. So karma has a way of coming back and saying, this is what you are supposed to do, whether you think it's what you want to do or not. And that's when you really learn what your dharma is. You know, you mentioned about service. And for me, one of the greatest teachings has been how to be an instrument, a tool, a vehicle, a vessel of service. And by the way, this, of course, is not only a Hindu teaching. For me, one of my greatest inspirations is the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. It says, "O Lord, make me an instrument of thy mercy, an instrument of thy grace." An instrument. So that's been a beautiful teaching, to serve not what you want to do, but to serve what is needed in the moment.
Now, this is quite a bit of spiritual development. What have been the biggest challenges on your journey?
I think the biggest challenges for me have been, number one, the education and the culture that I came from. Because, of course, I was very well educated, overeducated in some ways. And that carries with it a sense of arrogance, a sense of, I know who I am. I know what I need. I know what's right. And for example, in terms of dealing with my pain and my suffering, that which I needed healing and transformation from, as the subtitle of a journey of healing and transformation. Well, as I walked into India carrying the pain, carrying the suffering, carrying the struggle, I thought I knew what I needed, which was the therapy I was in, the processes I was undergoing, all of this, the people I was working with to heal from that. And when Puja Swamiji said to me, let it go, let it go, give it to the river. Give your pain, give your anger, give that which you're holding on to the river. I thought it was very sweet, but I thought it was obviously not going to work. And there was a sense of arrogance in the system that I had been schooled in about who I was. I was my body, I was my history, I was my identity, I was my struggles, I was my pain, I was my addictions, I was my family drama, that was who I am. And that was a huge obstacle, because we can't be free until we let go of who we think we are. And being able to even open my heart and my mind to the possibility that what this incredible spiritual master had just suggested to me was not impossible, but actually might be something that had great depth. Just to open myself to that possibility was huge. And to actually be able to do it, to let it go. I'll read you from that sharing of it, because most of us move through the world holding on to our pain. We hold on to our identities, we hold on to our suffering, we hold on to our history. And we think that that's who we are. And one of the greatest lessons that I was given, blessings I was given, was freedom from that challenge, freedom from being stuck. So it begins with me asking Pujya Swamiji, my guru, about fear. I whispered, fear runs my life. I have a sense of anxiety all the time, even when I don't know what I am afraid of. You fear because you don't trust, he said after a brief pause. I thought he would continue, but he didn't. Just that, lack of trust. Really horrible things have happened to me that made me unable to trust. And I told him the full story of my 25 years, my struggles, my difficulties, the trauma. It was a story I had told many times, and it never failed to elicit sympathy, open arms, and praise for how strong I am. He just looked at me and asked, are you going to take this to the grave with you? Oh no, I thought, of course not. Are you going to let it go on your deathbed just before you die? No, of course, I replied. I don't want to take this unbearable pain to my deathbed, which was surely 6 or 7 decades away at least. Will you let it go a week before you die? A month before you die? He continued to ask, never shifting his gaze from its lock on my heart. Swamiji, I don't want to take this to my grave or my deathbed. I don't want to hold on to it until a week or a month before I die. I want to be free of it as soon as possible. I'm in therapy with a wonderful psychologist. I'm processing it all so I can heal and move on with my life. He continued to look at me calmly, with neither sympathy nor judgment. His presence stretched so wide, I was able to hold the love that poured from his eyes, the pain I'd experienced, and even the perpetrator in his gaze. There was room for everything. Then he said, you are waiting for someone to come and draw the line for you. You are waiting for someone to come and say, now you are done. But no one will do that. You must draw the line yourself. The choice is yours. You can carry the pain to the grave. You can give it up on your deathbed. You can give it up a week or a month before you die, or you can give it up tonight. Tonight? Seriously? I didn't speak, but he must have heard my thoughts. Yes, tonight, he said. We have a beautiful ceremony at sunset called the Arati. I will tell the priest to give you the oil lamp so you can pray with it. Then go to the Ganga River and give her your pain. Take her water in your hands and give it all to her. Just give it to the river. If you give it, she will take it. He patted me gently on the head as he stood and walked out of the room. Only as the door clicked shut behind me did I remember to bow. Just give it to the river, I wrote over and over in my journal, smiling as I replayed in my mind his touching yet nonsensical instructions. Fortunately, I was being treated by doctors and psychologists who knew what to do. Abreactive therapy, extended trance-like regressions, behavior modification techniques, and the passage of time. These were the answers to my problems. I wasn't about to rely on a river to wash them away. Afternoon became evening, and I sat on the cool marble steps lining the banks of the flowing Ganga River. As the final rays of light danced on the waters, the sound of Vedic mantras filled my ears. I stopped giggling long enough to remember my vow from the airplane, to keep my heart open or leave India. To mock an instruction as seemingly useless as the one I had received today might be breaking my vow at the moment it was most needed, particularly as it had come from the mouth of someone revered as an enlightened master, particularly as my breath had stopped when he said it, particularly as I felt more comfortable and more at home in my own skin while sitting in his presence than I had ever felt before. During the evening light ceremony, called the Arati, I allowed myself to be swept away by the song, the music, the chanting. After the ceremony, as the guests began to disperse, I walked calf deep into the river. The moon rose over the mountains and glistened on the surface of the water. I entered a silence so deep, it was a place in itself, wrapping me in its arms, in that place of silence. I bent down into the water and carried out Swamiji's instructions. I cupped the river water in my hands and offered all my pain, all my tears, and all my fear into the water I held in my two hands. You must forgive, Swamiji had said. Give your anger and your grudges to the water, and then pour it back into the river. I stood up to my knees in Mother Ganga until the moon was directly overhead, all the while calling forth every image that had ever caused me pain, that had caused me to dissociate. I recalled countless images that had formed this background of my life. Then, in the midst of these images, I saw him from this place of imperturbable silence, and I saw not a monster, but a troubled man who had made mistakes. I saw a man now far away who could no longer harm me, whose life was just as haunted by these choices as mine. And I saw a man who loved me despite his inability to express it. I saw a man I could forgive. Tears mixed with the water in my hands, and I prayed and cried and prayed and cried, all in silence. They were tears not of yesterday, but of today. Tears of release rather than terror, knowing I needed to embrace what is rather than what might have been. I called his image to mind again, stared deeply into his eyes and said, I forgive you. Then I let the water pour from my hands back into the river. Take the pain, I prayed. I give it all to you. And amazingly, as you know, because you know me and you know the story, it worked. Not only because of the sacred magic of Mother Ganga. It's not about the river reaching into me and wresting it from me, but it's about that willingness to embrace the possibility of freedom, to embrace the possibility that I might not be the one who is the victim of this, suffering from that, having this pain, that trouble. And in that moment, united with this sacred river, I knew that that was no longer who I was, and that who I was divine and infinite and free.
What a beautiful story of trust and life and letting go and choosing the divine.
Yes. And this is, it's something for all of us, because we hold on to our pain and our grudges because we think somehow that if we forgive, that it absolves those who have hurt us of what they've done. And that for me has been one of the core lessons that I've learned, is we don't forgive because what someone did was okay. We forgive because we deserve to be free. And that willingness to take the responsibility for your own freedom has been one of the greatest lessons for me.
How beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Now, I'm wondering if we have people that would be interested in asking some questions, because I know that there are a lot of questions that people have about what it's like being a woman spiritual teacher in what's often thought of as a men's society.
Yes. So I'll answer that first, and then we'll go to other questions that we have. It's been a challenge. It's absolutely been a challenge, as every woman in a world that is mostly a world of men knows. And whether it's in a business, whether it's in a profession, whether it's in a hobby, whatever it may be in my case, my life, the life of the world of religion, and especially religion in India, and especially the tradition, the lineage, the order of sannyas, of the monastic tradition. It's been absolutely a challenge. And it's also been a great blessing, because it's enabled me to find a spaciousness within myself that embraces the love and the reverence I have for the tradition, for the male leaders who continue to uphold a system in which it's basically a man's world, to hold the love and the reverence for them and for the tradition that enables them to keep perpetuating this distinction and separation, but also simultaneously to love and revere the very female body that I have been so blessed to come into this world in. And for it not to be an either or. Neither is it a rebellion of, I hate you all, you're wrong, this is wrong, I'm going to dismantle the system, which would be not only absurd, but it would be tragic, because the tradition has a lot of parts to it. And the fact that it's a man's world is only one tiny part of it. And the tradition is one of such extraordinary wisdom and insight and truth. And it's not, interestingly, a man's world even in the actual scriptural traditions. The religion, the spiritual lineage, is actually rooted in worship of the divine feminine. It's one of the only traditions I know of, the only one I can think of, that actually dedicates so much time and energy to worship of the divine feminine, of the mother goddess. That whenever we pray, it's always the feminine first, the masculine after.
Doesn't Kali stand on Shiva's head?
She does. And we worship them, right? So exactly. Not only are we worshiping the mother goddesses who bring wisdom and love and prosperity, but we worship the mother goddess who is this powerhouse for Shakti, who literally stands on Shiva's head. But that aspect of within the society, within the actual on the ground religion, you can say, is just a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of this extraordinary tradition. So to try to fight it, makes no sense and would be incredibly futile. To fight it in that way, I'll come to how we're working with it, but to fight it in the aggressive, it's wrong, I hate it, we have to change it way, would be not only futile, but it
Would give it power.
would give it power, and it would be horrendous
Mm-hmm.
because it would disparage one of the most truth-filled, insight-filled, wisdom-filled, divinity-filled traditions in the entire history of the world. So simultaneously, though, to feel like, oh God, I wish I had been born a boy. I wish that I had, that I weren't a woman, would be simultaneously to disparage this extraordinary and exquisite creation of womanhood. And yet that's where most of us go, is either, well, that's right, at which point I'm wrong, or I'm right, at which point that's wrong. And for me, the beautiful opportunity has been to create this spaciousness of love and reverence for the entire tradition, as well as those who uphold every part of it, including the kind of man's world part of it, while simultaneously loving and revering and appreciating and being so grateful for this female body. And along with that, of course, we are working to do whatever is possible from the inside to create more space for women. My guru is an amazing, amazing leader and champion of this. He's always bringing women forward, always reminding everyone of the importance of seeing the divine feminine, the mother goddess, in the form of all of the women in our lives. So it's changing. It's changing slowly, slowly, slowly. But yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. And it's been a beautiful challenge to hold that love of the divine feminine in this form, even sitting, on a stage amidst 100 men, and to not feel what I know a lot of women feel in situations like that.
We began with you being enfolded by the Mother Ganga.
Yes.
And it seems to me that she rejects nobody or anything.
Absolutely.
And
exactly.
we're completing with you being like the mother, enfolding, embracing, and including.
It's been a beautiful, 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 just exquisite journey and blessing. And I've been so grateful to be able to share it with people through the book, to share all of the depths and the parts and the nuances of it through the book. The part that's the adventure, my particular adventure, the exuberance, the laughter, the tears, the struggles, the ecstasy, the expansion. And also the part of my journey, which is everyone's journey. That shift in mindset, that shift in thought patterns from what you could think of as a Hollywood way of thinking. You are your body, you are your bank account, you are your title, you are your career, you are your history, to the Himalayan way of thinking, which is you are infinite, you are the divine, you are soul, you are spirit, you are love, you are truth, you are consciousness.
So I think we have the vivacity of a young woman who loves Indian food and is on a spiritual journey with her husband, recovering from untold traumas, who has grown into a significant spiritual teacher who's going to answer a question. We have a question now. Could you ask it for us?
Yeah, one question just came in. Sadhviji, what have you learned from writing this book?
What have I learned from writing the book? Yeah, that's your question. Okay. So I've learned to see my own life as an arc. As you live your own life, or as I've lived my own life, I never necessarily realized the way that all the pieces fit together. I never necessarily realized how important, for example, the trauma that I experienced was. I never realized how important the fact that I struggled had been. I remember when I first came to India thinking, oh God, I wish I had just been born here. It would have made things so much easier. I would have, known the culture, understood everything. I wouldn't have had to go through all of this. And then I realized as the years went by, and particularly as I sat to write the book and it all flowed, oh yeah, of course I had to go through this in order to be able to convey these teachings in a way that people in the Western world can identify with. Because mostly the biographies and autobiographies that we get coming out of the East are stories of, men who basically came out of the womb enlightened. And they're beautiful, they're amazing to read. But when we read them, a lot of people feel like, well, that's great and inspiring and amazing. And maybe next life I could have that happen, but certainly not.
But there's a
this
little
life.
humanity missing.
What I went through actually serves a purpose in the ability to share with people that shift, that possibility that whatever you've struggled with, whatever you've experienced, that grace is there for you. Freedom is there for you. Joy, peace, it's all there for you. And to write the book in a way where I give the lessons that I learned through the story so that people get the story, but they also get the lesson.
Oh, beautiful.
And that was a very great teaching experience to have to do it in that way, that it's a story, but a story that when people read it, they feel like, yes, that could be my story.
Hollywood to the Himalayas, a journey of healing and transformation. And thank you so much to Barbara's for having us here. And thank you so much for the beautiful dedication of your being.
And thank you so much, Bob. It's been beautiful to be with you. And again, just to reiterate, thank you again so much to Barbara's for hosting this beautiful, beautiful event and bringing us together this evening.
Amen.